When my father died suddenly last month, I expected grief and funeral arrangements. What I did not expect was discovering my sister-in-law, Vivienne, had been secretly meeting with estate lawyers for over 2 years, positioning herself as the primary beneficiary of his $600 million fortune. The woman who barely spoke to Dad at family dinners had somehow convinced him to rewrite his will completely. Standing in that lawyer's office holding documents that proved her calculated manipulation, I realized my entire family had been living a lie. Before we dive into this shocking family betrayal story, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable family drama stories. Trust me, what Vivienne did next will completely blow your mind, and you will want to see how karma finally caught up with her. My name is Seraphina, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed my family was built on love and trust. Dad had always been a successful tech entrepreneur, but none of us knew the true extent of his wealth until his sudden heart attack at 62. Growing up, he lived modestly, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and never flaunted money. We knew he was comfortable, but $600 million. That revelation alone would have been shocking enough. The real bombshell came during the will reading. I sat there with my brother Marcus, expecting a simple division of assets between his children, and maybe a small portion for Marcus's wife, Vivienne. Instead, the lawyer announced that Vivienne would inherit $450 million, while Marcus and I would split the remaining $150 million. The room went silent except for Vivienne's fake gasp of surprise. "I had no idea Harold was planning this," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. He must have wanted to ensure Marcus and I could take care of everyone. Her performance was Academy Award worthy, but something felt deeply wrong. Dad had always been protective of family money, often saying blood should come first in all matters. That evening, I could not sleep. Dad's sudden generosity toward Vivienne contradicted everything I knew about his values. He had specifically told me just 6 months earlier that he was updating his will to ensure the family legacy stays in family hands. Why would he then give the majority to someone who married into the family only 4 years ago? The next morning, I called Dad's longtime friend and business partner Robert, who had known our family for decades. His reaction to the inheritance news confirmed my suspicions. "That does not sound like Harold at all," Robert said immediately. "He came to me last year worried about Vivienne's spending habits, said she was pressuring Marcus to ask for loans for her luxury shopping and expensive vacations. Harold was actually concerned she was a gold digger." Robert's words hit like a sledgehammer. I started digging deeper, beginning with Dad's medical records. What I discovered made my blood run cold. For the past 2 years, Dad had been seeing a neurologist for early-stage dementia. The diagnosis was kept private, but the medical timeline aligned perfectly with the will changes. I hired a private investigator named Derek, whose background in financial fraud cases made him perfect for this situation. Within a week, Derek uncovered a paper trail that revealed Vivienne's elaborate scheme. She had been secretly researching Dad's medical condition, timing her manipulation to coincide with his cognitive decline. The evidence was damning. Derek found records showing Vivienne had been meeting with elder care attorneys, learning about undue influence laws and how to circumvent them. She had even purchased books about dementia care, not out of compassion, but to understand how to exploit Dad's condition. More disturbing were the witness statements Derek collected. Dad's housekeeper, Maria, revealed that Vivienne had been visiting Dad alone every Tuesday for months, always insisting Marcus stay home. During these visits, she would bring legal documents claiming they were just insurance papers that needed signing. "Miss Vivienne always brought cookies and coffee," Maria told Derek. "She would sit with your father for hours talking about how Marcus needed security for their future children, how the family business required strong leadership. She made it sound like giving her control was the loving thing to do. The manipulation was systematic and cruel. Vivienne had identified Dad's deepest fear, that his children would not be financially secure, and twisted it into justification for her inheritance grab. She positioned herself as Marcus's protective wife, while simultaneously stealing from Marcus himself. Derek also discovered that Vivienne had been secretly recording her conversations with Dad, not for sentimental reasons, but to study his responses and refine her manipulation techniques. The recordings, which we obtained through legal channels, revealed her coaching Dad on what to say to his lawyer. "Remember, Harold, you want to make sure Marcus has everything he needs?" Her voice coached on one recording. "I can manage the money better than Seraphina can. She is too emotional with finances. You want someone practical and control, right?" The most heartbreaking part was hearing Dad's confused responses. His once sharp mind, weakened by dementia, could not recognize the manipulation happening in real time. Vivienne had taken advantage of a vulnerable elderly man's love for his son to steal his life's work. When I confronted Marcus with the evidence, his initial reaction was denial and anger toward me, not Vivienne. "She loves our family," he insisted. "Dad must have seen something in her that we missed." But as Derek presented more evidence, including financial records showing Vivienne's secret credit card debts and gambling expenses, Marcus's certainty began cracking. The final piece of evidence that broke Marcus was a recording where Vivienne explicitly discussed her plans with an unknown accomplice, likely her sister. "Once the old man kicks the bucket, we will be set for life," she said, laughing. "Marcus is too trusting to question anything, and Seraphina is too emotional to think clearly. By the time they figure out what happened, the money will be legally mine." Hearing his wife's true feelings about him and our family destroyed Marcus. The woman he loved and trusted had been planning his father's financial exploitation from the very beginning. She had married him not for love, but for access to wealth she had researched and coveted. The confrontation with Marcus happened in my kitchen on a rainy Thursday evening. I had asked him to come alone, knowing Vivienne would try to manipulate the situation if she were present. When I played the recording of her laughing about Dad's death and calling Marcus too trusting, I watched my brother's face transform from confusion to devastation to cold fury. "That is not the woman I married," Marcus said quietly, his hands shaking as he held the transcript. "The Vivienne I fell in love with was caring, supportive, interested in family values. This person, this is a complete stranger." We spent 3 hours going through Derek's evidence together. Bank records showed Vivienne had accumulated over $200,000 in secret debt through luxury shopping, high-end spa treatments, and what appeared to be significant gambling losses at local casinos. She had been living a double life, presenting herself as a devoted wife while systematically planning to rob our family blind. The most painful discovery was a detailed notebook Derek had found in Vivienne's car during his surveillance. The notebook contained what could only be described as a manipulation manual. She had documented Dad's routine, his medical appointments, his emotional triggers, and his growing confusion. One page was titled "Harold's Weak Points" and listed his fear of being a burden, his worry about Marcus's financial future, and his increasing forgetfulness about recent conversations. "She studied him like a laboratory experiment," Marcus said, his voice filled with disgust. "Every kind gesture, every family dinner, every time she asked about his health, it was all research for her con game." But the notebook contained something even more sinister. Vivienne had been planning beyond just the inheritance. She had researched ways to have Marcus declared incompetent to manage money, positioning herself as the sole controller of the entire fortune. Her notes included phrases like emotional instability after father's death and gambling addiction concerns, clearly preparing to paint Marcus as unfit to handle finances. She was planning to steal from me too. Marcus realized, reading her notes about convincing future doctors, that he had developed gambling problems. The inheritance was just step one. She wanted everything. That night, we developed our strategy. Simply contesting the will would take years and might not succeed, especially since Vivienne had been careful to follow legal procedures. Instead, we decided to expose her systematic fraud and elder abuse, which carried both civil and criminal penalties. Derek recommended we work with a specialized attorney named Patricia Hawkins, who had successfully prosecuted similar cases of financial elder abuse. Patricia reviewed our evidence and confirmed we had grounds for criminal charges, not just a civil will contest. "This is textbook elder abuse with premeditation," Patricia explained during our first meeting. "The recordings alone prove intent to defraud. Combined with the medical evidence of your father's diminished capacity and the timeline of will changes, we can demonstrate a clear pattern of exploitation." Our first step was protecting the estate assets. Patricia filed an emergency motion to freeze all inheritance distributions pending investigation of elder abuse allegations. The court agreed, meaning Vivienne could not access the money while the case proceeded. Vivienne's reaction to the asset freeze revealed her true priorities immediately. Instead of expressing concern for family relationships or attempting reconciliation, she hired an aggressive legal team and began attacking Marcus and me personally. Her lawyer sent threatening letters accusing us of being greedy siblings who cannot accept their father's final wishes. The irony was breathtaking. The woman who had systematically manipulated a dementia patient was calling us greedy for trying to protect our father's true intentions. Meanwhile, Derek continued investigating and his discoveries kept getting worse. He found evidence that Vivienne had been researching Dad's financial situation long before she even met Marcus. Social media records showed she had been following our family's business activities and Dad's public appearances for over a year before her first chance meeting with Marcus at a coffee shop. "Your brother was targeted," Derek explained. "She did not fall in love and then discover the money. She identified the money and then targeted your brother as her access point." The coffee shop meeting was not coincidental either. Derek's investigation revealed that Vivienne had been learning Marcus's routine, discovering he stopped at that specific location every Tuesday morning before work. She had planned their entire relationship from the very beginning. Patricia advised us to let Vivienne's legal aggression work in our favor. "Innocent people do not typically respond to elder abuse allegations with threats and intimidation," she noted. Her hostile reaction supports our case that this was always about money, never about family. During this time, Marcus struggled with the emotional reality of his situation. The woman he had planned to have children with the person he had trusted with his deepest feelings and family relationships had been manipulating him from day one. He began noticing signs he had missed during their relationship. How she always steered conversations toward Dad's business, how she insisted on private time with Dad, how she always knew exactly what gifts would make Dad feel guilty or obligated. "She made me feel like she was protecting Dad's dignity by spending private time with him," Marcus told me one evening. "She said it was important for her to bond with him separately to prove she was not just interested in our family money. The whole time she was using that private access to manipulate him." We also discovered that Vivienne had been secretly recording family conversations likely to study our family dynamics and identify leverage points for her manipulation. Her phone contained audio files labeled with dates and our names treating our private family moments like intelligence-gathering opportunities. The emotional toll on Marcus was severe, but it also strengthened his resolve to seek justice. "Dad trusted her," he said. "He welcomed her into our family, tried to make her feel loved and accepted. She repaid that kindness by exploiting his illness and stealing his life's work. That is unforgivable." As we prepared for the legal battle ahead, one thing became crystal clear. This was no longer just about money or inheritance. This was about protecting vulnerable people from predators who exploit trust and family bonds for personal gain. Vivienne had committed crimes that extended far beyond simple greed. She had systematically abused an elderly man's declining mental capacity while manipulating his son's love and loyalty. Our case gained momentum when Patricia introduced us to Dr. Elizabeth Santos, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in testifying about elder abuse cases. Dr. Santos reviewed Dad's medical records, the timeline of will changes, and the recordings Derek had obtained. Her professional assessment was devastating for Vivienne's position. Based on the medical evidence and the documented progression of Harold's dementia, he would have been particularly vulnerable to systematic manipulation during the exact period when these will changes occurred. Dr. Santos explained. The consistency of Tuesday visits, the isolation from other family members, and the gradual escalation of financial requests all indicate a predatory pattern designed to exploit cognitive decline. Dr. Santos also reviewed the recordings of Vivienne's conversations with Dad. Her analysis revealed sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques that Vivienne could not have stumbled upon accidentally. This woman was using textbook manipulation strategies, Dr. Santos continued. She repeatedly validated his fears about family security, then positioned herself as the solution. She created false urgency around financial decisions, prevented him from consulting other family members, and used his love for his son as emotional leverage. This was not opportunistic behavior. This was a calculated campaign of psychological exploitation. Meanwhile, Derek's investigation expanded beyond just Vivienne. He discovered she had been working with her sister Carmen, who had a background in financial planning and had been helping research estate law and inheritance procedures. Carmen had been feeding Vivienne information about legal strategies and helping her understand how to document her manipulation to make it appear legitimate. Phone records showed extensive communication between the sisters during the period of Dad's will changes. Text messages recovered through legal discovery revealed their coordination in disturbing detail. Harold signed the trust documents today. Read one message from Vivienne to Carmen. He was confused about some clauses, but I convinced him they were standard protections for Marcus. The lawyer did not ask too many questions since Harold seemed willing. Carmen's response was equally damaging. Perfect. Remember what we discussed about the final conversation. You need him to verbally confirm his intentions to someone trustworthy who can testify later if needed. Maybe suggest he call his accountant to explain his reasoning. The sisters had planned every detail, including creating false witnesses and documentation to support their theft. They had researched elder abuse laws, not to avoid breaking them, but to understand how to break them without getting caught. Patricia filed additional charges against Carmen for conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud. The sisters' coordination proved this was an organized crime, not just a family dispute over inheritance. During this period, something unexpected happened that changed everything. Marcus received a call from Robert Dad's business partner, who had been contacted by someone with information about Vivienne's past. You need to meet with Janet Morrison, Robert told us. She says she has important information about Vivienne that relates to your case, but she wants to speak privately first. Janet turned out to be Vivienne's former co-worker from a financial services company where Vivienne had worked 3 years earlier. What Janet revealed made our blood run cold. Vivienne did this before, Janet explained during our meeting at a quiet restaurant downtown. She targeted an elderly client named Mr. Patterson who had early-stage dementia. She convinced him to change his investment strategy and make her the beneficiary of several accounts. When his family discovered what happened, the company fired her quietly to avoid scandal. But Mr. Patterson died before they could recover the money. Janet had kept documentation of the incident because she had tried to report Vivienne's behavior to authorities at the time. However, Mr. Patterson's family had been too grief-stricken to pursue criminal charges, and the case was settled privately with a non-disclosure agreement. I never thought I would see her name again, Janet continued. When Robert reached out asking about her background, I knew I had to speak up. What she did to Mr. Patterson was identical to what you are describing. She studied his condition, isolated him from family, and systematically manipulated him over months. Janet's testimony provided crucial evidence that Vivienne's abuse of Dad was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly people. This transformed our case from a family inheritance dispute into evidence of serial elder abuse. Patricia immediately petitioned the court to allow Janet's testimony and the Patterson case evidence. This establishes a clear modus operandi, Patricia explained. Vivienne has done this before, which proves intent and premeditation. She is not a grieving daughter-in-law who happened into an inheritance. She is a serial predator who targets elderly people with cognitive decline. The Patterson case evidence also revealed how Vivienne had refined her techniques over time. With Mr. Patterson, she had been more obvious in her manipulation, making mistakes that led to her firing. By the time she targeted Dad, she had perfected her methods using Marcus's relationship as cover and being more careful about legal documentation. Around this time, our case attracted attention from Adult Protective Services, who opened their own investigation into Vivienne's actions. APS investigator Maria Gonzalez interviewed everyone involved and reviewed our evidence. What concerns us most is the systematic nature of this abuse, Maria explained. This was not someone making poor decisions in a moment of grief or desperation. This was a calculated campaign to exploit a vulnerable adult over an extended period. The recordings alone would be sufficient for criminal charges. Maria's investigation uncovered additional victims. She found that Vivienne had been volunteering at senior centers and assisted living facilities, always focusing on residents who had substantial assets and declining cognitive abilities. While she had not successfully defrauded anyone else, the pattern of targeting was clear. She was essentially scouting for future victims, Maria told us. Her volunteer activities were cover for identifying elderly people who might be susceptible to her manipulation techniques. The APS investigation results were forwarded to the district attorney's office, which opened a formal criminal investigation. Detective Ray Thompson was assigned to the case and immediately recognized its significance. Elder abuse cases are often difficult to prosecute because the victims cannot testify about their mental state during the manipulation, Detective Thompson explained. However, your father's medical records combined with the recordings and the pattern evidence from the Patterson case give us an unusually strong foundation for criminal charges. As the criminal investigation proceeded, Vivienne's behavior became increasingly desperate. She began reaching out to extended family members, trying to convince them that Marcus and I were lying about Dad's intentions. Her stories kept changing, sometimes claiming Dad had promised her the money years ago, other times insisting he had wanted to punish Marcus and me for being insufficiently grateful. Her inconsistent explanations only strengthened our case. Innocent people typically maintain consistent stories about significant events, while people covering up crimes often provide contradictory accounts as they try to manage multiple lies simultaneously. The most revealing moment came when Vivienne attempted to contact Dad's doctor directly, trying to convince him to alter his records about Dad's dementia diagnosis. The doctor immediately reported this contact to authorities, providing additional evidence of obstruction and consciousness of guilt. Why would someone try to hide medical records unless they knew those records proved wrongdoing? Patricia pointed out to the prosecutor. Her attempts to manipulate evidence demonstrate that she understands exactly what she did wrong. By this point, we had built an overwhelming case against Vivienne and Carmen. Multiple agencies were investigating. We had documentary evidence of systematic manipulation, witness testimony from previous victims, and recordings of the sisters planning their crimes. The legal net was closing around them, but the most dramatic revelations were still to come. What happens next will show you exactly how far some people will go to steal from families, and how satisfying it can be when justice finally catches up with them. The sisters thought they had planned the perfect crime, but they had made one critical mistake that would bring their entire scheme crashing down. The beginning of the end for Vivienne came from an unexpected source: her own greed. While our legal team was building the case against her, Vivienne made a fatal error that exposed the full scope of her criminal operation. 3 weeks into the criminal investigation, Detective Thompson received a call from First National Bank's fraud department. Vivienne had attempted to use forged power of attorney documents to access Dad's business accounts, which contained an additional $50 million she had not known about during her original inheritance planning. The documents were sophisticated forgeries, explained Bank Security Manager David Walsh. However, our fraud detection software flagged them because the signature analysis did not match previous authorized documents on file. When we investigated further, we discovered the supposed witness signatures belonged to people who were not even in the country during the dates listed on the documents. The forged power of attorney attempt triggered a federal investigation since it involved interstate banking fraud. FBI agent Sarah Chen was assigned to work with local authorities on what had now become a complex financial crimes case. Agent Chen's investigation revealed that Carmen had been running a sophisticated document forgery operation from her home office. Federal search warrants uncovered computers, printers, and software specifically designed for creating fake legal documents. The sisters had been planning to expand their elder abuse scheme nationwide. We found detailed target lists, Agent Chen explained during a briefing with our legal team. They had identified elderly people in multiple states who had substantial assets and potential cognitive decline. Your father was not their end goal. He was their proof of concept. The target lists were chilling. Carmen had been researching wealthy, elderly individuals through public records, obituary notices, and social media posts from their families. She had created detailed profiles, including health information, family relationships, and estimated net worth. They were planning to systematically exploit vulnerable elderly people across the country. Agent Chen continued. Vivienne would establish relationships through dating websites, volunteer organizations, or social clubs, while Carmen provided technical support for legal document forgery and financial research. The federal evidence completely transformed our case. What had begun as a family inheritance dispute was now a federal criminal conspiracy involving mail fraud, wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering. The sisters faced potential prison sentences of decades, not years. During this time, Vivienne's desperation reached new levels. Unaware that federal agents were monitoring her communications, she began reaching out to people from Dad's past, trying to find anyone who would testify that he had promised her money or expressed concerns about Marcus and me. These recorded conversations provided additional evidence of her guilt. In one particularly damaging call, she tried to convince Dad's former secretary to lie about conversations she claimed to have witnessed. "I know Harold told you he was worried about his children's spending habits," Vivienne said on the recorded call. "You remember how he said I was the responsible one who could manage money properly, right? I really need you to tell the investigators about those conversations." The secretary, Linda Martinez, had worked for Dad for 20 years and immediately recognized the manipulation attempt. "Harold never said anything like that," Linda responded firmly. "He was always proud of his children and concerned about protecting the family money from outsiders, not from Seraphina and Marcus." Vivienne's attempt to create false testimony was yet another federal crime added to her growing list of charges. The most devastating blow to Vivienne's defense came when Carmen decided to cooperate with federal authorities. Facing decades in federal prison, Carmen provided detailed testimony about their entire operation, including crimes they had planned but not yet committed. "Carmen gave us everything," Agent Chen reported. "Names, dates, methods, target lists, even recordings she had made of her conversations with Vivienne planning specific crimes. She documented their activities, thinking it would help them avoid getting caught, but it became the evidence that guaranteed their convictions." Carmen's cooperation revealed the true scope of their criminal enterprise. They had been operating for over 5 years, starting with small-scale financial exploitation and gradually building toward the systematic targeting of elderly people with substantial assets. The Patterson case that Janet Morrison had told us about was not their first victim. It was simply the first time they had been caught. Carmen's records showed at least 12 other elderly people who had been successfully defrauded of smaller amounts ranging from $50,000 to $300,000 each. "They had stolen over $4 million before targeting your father," Agent Chen explained. Your father's $600 million estate was supposed to be their retirement score, the crime that would set them up for life. The federal investigation also revealed how they laundered their previous theft proceeds. Carmen had been investing stolen money in legitimate businesses and real estate, creating a complex financial network designed to hide the criminal origins of their wealth. All of these hidden assets were frozen and would eventually be used to compensate their victims. Marcus and I learned that our pursuit of justice for Dad had inadvertently helped recover millions of dollars for other families who had been defrauded by the sisters. As the evidence mounted, Vivienne's legal team began exploring plea bargain options. However, Patricia made it clear that we would not agree to any deal that did not include significant prison time and full restitution to all victims. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, Patricia told the federal prosecutors. This was a years-long criminal enterprise that systematically targeted the most vulnerable members of society. Any plea agreement must reflect the serious nature of these crimes and serve as a deterrent to others who might consider similar schemes. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court provided additional insights into Vivienne's criminal mindset. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a forensic psychologist specializing in financial crimes, concluded that Vivienne demonstrated classic characteristics of a predatory personality. She shows no genuine remorse for her victims, Dr. Rodriguez reported. Her primary concern throughout this process has been avoiding consequences for herself, not the harm she caused to elderly people and their families. This suggests a high likelihood of reoffending if given the opportunity. The evaluation also revealed that Vivienne had been studying psychology and persuasion techniques for years, specifically focusing on methods for manipulating elderly people. Her personal library contained dozens of books about cognitive decline inheritance law and psychological influence techniques. She approached elder abuse like a professional criminal specialty, Dr. Rodriguez explained. This was not opportunistic behavior. She had systematically educated herself about how to exploit vulnerable elderly people most effectively. As all this evidence came together, the federal prosecutors informed us that Vivienne and Carmen would be facing a massive indictment with over 40 separate criminal charges. The sisters who had thought they were so clever in planning Dad's exploitation were about to discover that their criminal empire was completely exposed. The truth was finally coming out, and justice was about to be served in a way that neither sister had anticipated when they began their cruel manipulation of my father. The indictments came down on a cold Monday morning in February. Vivienne and Carmen were arrested simultaneously by federal agents at their respective homes, and the local news stations covered the arrests as a major financial crime story. Watching Vivienne being led away in handcuffs on the evening news was surreal. This woman who had sat at our family dinner table, who had hugged Dad and called him her second father, was now exposed as a predatory criminal who had systematically exploited his declining mental health for financial gain. The formal indictment contained 47 separate charges, including elder abuse, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering conspiracy, and racketeering. If convicted on all counts, Vivienne faced up to 150 years in federal prison. Marcus stood beside me as we watched the news coverage, and I could see the mixture of vindication and sadness in his eyes. The woman he had loved and trusted had not only betrayed our family, but had been using his emotions as a tool in her criminal enterprise from the very beginning. I keep thinking about all the times she comforted me when I was worried about Dad's health, Marcus said quietly. She knew exactly what was happening to him because she was causing it. Every concern I expressed, every fear I shared about losing him, she was using that information to plan her next manipulation. The immediate aftermath of the arrests brought unexpected support from the community. Other families came forward with stories of elderly relatives who had been approached by women matching Vivienne's description at senior centers and community events. While not all of these contacts had led to financial crimes, the pattern suggested Vivienne had been actively scouting for potential victims throughout our area. One particularly heartbreaking story came from the Williams family, whose 80-year-old mother had befriended Vivienne at a local library. Mrs. Williams had early-stage Alzheimer's and had been regularly visited by Vivienne, who claimed to be interested in her late husband's military service. Mom started talking about changing her will to help sweet Vivienne pay for nursing school, Mrs. Williams' daughter explained. We thought it was just confusion from the Alzheimer's, but now we realize Vivienne was in the early stages of manipulating her just like she did with your father. The Williams family had unknowingly protected their mother by increasing family supervision, but their story illustrated how many potential victims Vivienne had been cultivating simultaneously. Federal prosecutors used these additional cases to demonstrate the scope of Vivienne's criminal enterprise during her bail hearing. The judge denied bail, ruling that Vivienne posed a continued threat to elderly community members and a flight risk given the severity of the charges against her. Carmen's bail was also denied after prosecutors revealed she had been researching countries without extradition treaties to the United States. Federal agents had found travel brochures and immigration information for several South American countries in her home, along with inquiries about moving large sums of money internationally. The sisters' arrest triggered a cascade of additional consequences. The financial institutions where Carmen had laundered stolen money began freezing accounts and cooperating with federal investigators. Real estate properties purchased with stolen funds were seized and would eventually be sold to compensate victims. Marcus and I worked with Patricia to ensure that Dad's estate was properly protected and that his true wishes were honored. The court invalidated all will changes made during the period of Vivienne's manipulation, restoring the original distribution plan that left everything to Marcus and me equally. However, recovering the money was only part of our healing process. We also established the Herald Foundation for Elder Protection, using a portion of the inheritance to fund education programs about financial elder abuse and support services for families dealing with similar crimes. Dad always believed in protecting people who could not protect themselves, I explained at the foundation's launch event. Creating this foundation from the money Vivienne tried to steal feels like the best way to honor his memory and prevent other families from experiencing what we went through. The foundation's first initiative was funding training programs for bank employees, lawyers, and healthcare workers to recognize signs of elder abuse. We also created support groups for family members who had discovered their elderly relatives were being financially exploited. During this period, Derek's continued investigation uncovered the most disturbing evidence yet. Hidden in Carmen's computer files were detailed psychological profiles she had created for each of their victims, including Dad. These profiles analyzed personality weaknesses, family relationships, and specific manipulation strategies tailored to each individual. Dad's profile was particularly painful to read. Carmen had documented his fear of being a burden, his pride in his business success, his concern for Marcus's future, and his increasing confusion about financial details. She had identified these as leverage points for Vivienne's manipulation campaign. Vivienne studied your father like a predator studies prey, Agent Chen explained when she showed us the profiles. She knew exactly which emotional buttons to push because Carmen had provided detailed psychological blueprints for manipulating him. The profiles also revealed how calculating both sisters had been. They had ranked potential victims by vulnerability level, asset value, and family situation. Dad had received their highest target rating because of his substantial wealth, his diagnosed cognitive decline, and what they perceived as family discord that could provide cover for their manipulation. As the federal case proceeded toward trial, Vivienne's defense team approached us about a potential plea agreement. They proposed that Vivienne would plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperating with investigations into other financial elder abuse cases. After consulting with other victim families, Marcus and I decided to support a plea agreement only if it included significant prison time and required Vivienne to participate in educational programs about elder abuse prevention. "We want justice, not just revenge," Marcus explained to the prosecutors. "If her cooperation can help protect other elderly people and bring closure to other victim families, we support that outcome, as long as she faces serious consequences for what she did to Dad and everyone else she hurt." The plea negotiations revealed just how many elderly people had been targeted by similar schemes. Federal investigations were opening in multiple states based on information provided by Carmen, and potentially by Vivienne, if she cooperated. Our case had exposed not just individual criminals, but an entire network of people who specialized in exploiting vulnerable elderly individuals. The federal response would eventually lead to new legislation strengthening penalties for elder abuse and requiring better reporting systems for suspicious financial activity involving elderly victims. As we prepared for the final resolution of the case, Marcus and I reflected on how much our family had changed. We had lost our father and discovered that someone we trusted had been systematically betraying that trust. However, we had also learned the importance of protecting vulnerable people and standing up for justice, even when it meant confronting difficult truths about people we thought we knew. The final chapter of our nightmare began exactly 1 year after Dad's death. Vivienne accepted a plea agreement that sentenced her to 28 years in federal prison, while Carmen received 15 years for her cooperation with ongoing investigations. Both women would serve their sentences without possibility of parole for the first 12 years. Standing in that federal courthouse as the judge read their sentences was one of the most emotionally complex moments of my life. I felt relief, vindication, anger, and sadness all simultaneously. Relief that justice had been served. Vindication that our pursuit of truth had been correct. Anger at the years of manipulation our family had endured, and sadness that Dad never lived to see his abusers held accountable. Marcus squeezed my hand as Vivienne was led away in shackles. She had refused to make any statement of remorse, maintaining even in her final court appearance that she had only tried to help the family. Her complete inability to acknowledge the pain she had caused made it clear that our decision to pursue criminal charges had been absolutely correct. The financial restitution process took several months, but eventually all victim families recovered their stolen money with interest. The Herald Foundation for Elder Protection used the remaining seized assets to establish permanent funding for elder abuse prevention programs in 12 states. More importantly, our case had triggered legislative changes at both state and federal levels. The Herald Act, named after Dad, now requires financial institutions to flag unusual activity in accounts belonging to elderly customers with documented cognitive decline. Banks must now contact designated family members before processing large transfers or will-related transactions for at-risk elderly customers. The law also established mandatory training programs for attorneys who work with elderly clients, requiring them to recognize signs of undue influence and report suspected abuse to authorities. While we could not save Dad from Vivienne's manipulation, we could help protect other elderly people from similar predators. Our family relationships had been permanently changed, but in some ways strengthened. Marcus and I had always been close, but working together to seek justice for Dad had deepened our bond in unexpected ways. We had learned to trust each other completely and to prioritize family loyalty over social appearances. Marcus began attending therapy to process the emotional trauma of discovering that his marriage had been built on lies and manipulation. The therapist helped him understand that being targeted by a skilled manipulator was not a reflection of his character or intelligence, but rather evidence of his trusting and loving nature. Predators specifically target good people, his therapist explained. They look for individuals who are generous, loyal, and willing to see the best in others. Your capacity for trust and love made you vulnerable to Vivienne's manipulation, but those same qualities make you a valuable person and family member. The therapy process also helped Marcus forgive himself for not recognizing the warning signs earlier. The guilt he felt about not protecting Dad from Vivienne's abuse had been eating away at his self-esteem and his ability to form new relationships. During this healing period, Marcus met Jennifer, a social worker who specialized in eldercare advocacy. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally built on shared values about protecting vulnerable people rather than the artificial intensity that Vivienne had manufactured to manipulate his emotions. The difference between Jennifer and Vivienne is honesty, Marcus told me one evening. With Jennifer, I never feel like I am being studied or managed. She disagrees with me, sometimes, challenges my opinions, treats me like an equal partner rather than a target to be manipulated. Jennifer became an important part of our extended family, contributing her professional expertise to the Herald Foundation and helping us develop more effective elder protection programs. Her genuine care for elderly people provided a beautiful contrast to Vivienne's predatory exploitation. The Foundation's work became a meaningful way to honor Dad's memory while creating positive change in the world. We funded research into early detection of financial elder abuse, created educational materials for families dealing with dementia, and established support networks for elderly people who might be isolated and vulnerable to manipulation. One of our most successful programs paired elderly individuals with trained volunteer companions who provided both social interaction and informal monitoring for signs of exploitation. The program had prevented several attempted financial scams and had improved quality of life for hundreds of elderly participants. 3 years after Dad's death, Marcus and Jennifer got married in a simple ceremony that focused on family love and genuine commitment. Dad would have loved Jennifer's kindness and her dedication to helping others. The contrast with Vivienne's manipulative presentation could not have been more stark. At the wedding reception, Robert, Dad's business partner, gave a toast that captured the growth our family had experienced through our struggle for justice. Harold would be incredibly proud of how his children turned their grief and anger into protection for other people, Robert said. Seraphina and Marcus could have simply accepted the injustice and moved on with their lives. Instead, they fought for truth, sought justice for their father, and created lasting change that will protect countless elderly people in the future. The most meaningful validation came from other victim families who reached out to thank us for pursuing criminal charges against Vivienne and Carmen. Many of these families had given up hope of ever seeing justice for their elderly relatives who had been defrauded. Your courage to fight back gave us the evidence we needed to reopen our grandfather's case, wrote one family whose elderly patriarch had been defrauded by the sisters 3 years earlier. We thought we would never see justice, but because of your investigation, we finally have closure, and our grandfather's money has been returned to our family. Looking back on this entire experience, I realized that while we could not save Dad from Vivienne's manipulation, we had transformed his victimization into protection for countless other elderly people. The Herald Foundation, the new legislation, and the criminal convictions had created a legacy of protection that would honor Dad's memory far more meaningfully than any amount of money could have done. Today, Marcus and I continue working together through the foundation, and our relationship with Jennifer has added joy and purpose to our lives. We learned that while blood family relationships are important, chosen family relationships built on shared values and genuine care can be equally meaningful. Dad's true legacy was not the money he accumulated, but the values he taught us about protecting vulnerable people and standing up for what is right. In fighting for justice against Vivienne, we had honored those values and created positive change that will protect families for generations to come. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely, or witnessed a family member being taken advantage of by someone who seemed caring and trustworthy? I would love to hear your stories and thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences could help other people recognize warning signs or feel less alone in their struggles for justice. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life family drama stories, and share this video with anyone who might benefit from learning about these manipulation tactics. Thank you for following our journey from betrayal to justice, and remember that sometimes the most painful family situations can lead to the most meaningful growth and positive change. The truth always finds a way to surface, and justice may take time, but it is worth fighting for when protecting the people we love.